Welcome back to Us Creative Types, the podcast that examines creativity through conversations with the people behind the work, exploring milestones in their lives and what they've learned along the way. I'm your host, Scott Littroff. There are creative media that people consume constantly, yet rarely consider the extraordinary level of coordination, intuition, and decision-making happening behind the scenes. Live sports broadcasting is one of them. My guest today is a multiple Emmy Award-winning television producer and executive whose career spans decades in sports broadcasting, including major leadership roles at MSG Network, Yes Network, USA Network, and Classic Sports Network. What struck me during our conversation was the way he describes live television as a collaborative process where trust, timing, preparation, and instinct all converge in real time. And ultimately, he and his colleagues are storytellers, guiding viewers as those stories unfold through the pinnacle of athletic display. This conversation gave me a new appreciation not only for the craft of broadcasting, but for the countless creative people whose work exists behind the camera, behind the control room glass, and often behind the scenes entirely. It is my pleasure to share with you my conversation with Jeff Filippi. Hi, Jeff.
Hello,
Jeff
Scott.
Filippi, thank you so much for being here. It really is an honor to have you here, and I'm really happy that we can have this conversation today.
Same here, Scott. Been looking forward to it. Really happy to be here.
Thank you. So before we get into anything, what I would like to do is just a brief overview for anyone who does not know the powerhouse of a person that you are. So you, most recently, and this was for the past 25 years, you were the senior vice president and executive producer of MSG Networks.
Yes.
And you had been working with MSG for quite some time.
Yep.
In executive
About 20,
positions.
25 years. Yeah, exactly.
And previously you were actually on the ground up of Classic Sports Network.
Correct.
Worked with USA Networks.
Mm-hmm. All
and,
true.
And you've had a very long career in broadcasting, in sports, in television.
Yes, those are definitely the three areas. Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, that was always my interest. I'm one of those lucky people, maybe like you, when it comes to being a musician, where however this happened and why it happened, I don't question it. But from my earliest memories, I loved the television. I loved watching television. My family situation is I was the oldest. And my brother's about 5 years younger. So when I was, 6, 7, 8 years old, he still wasn't around to play. And the television became, again, it was a simple life. This is the 1960s we're talking about. So it's way simpler than things are now. So watching anything on television was interesting. I remember just sort of loved the television. I remember all the spaceship launches that I'd watch as a kid because they seemed to be so prevalent in the 60s and they were fascinating. And then for whatever reason, I would even mimic what I was seeing on television and create my sort of own game shows or games as I was seeing on television. So it was something I always wanted to do. Loved sports, played sports. So went to Adelphi, as you know, and threw myself into things like the college radio station, putting together films and TV shows, et cetera, et cetera. And then I just started my journey in basically sports television. I mean, there's been a couple of detours, but not many. I mean, that's basically what I've done. And when I started, it was back in the day where ESPN had just started, right? So when you wanted to get into sports television all those years ago, it was really one of the three networks was the place you wanted to work. It's hard to think of that now because people don't think that way anymore.
So this was, of course, before those days where all the different major league sports have their own networks that are producing their own content. So now we have this plethora of options, kind of maybe too
100%.
Many options, right?
Right. We're talking about a world where there was ABC, NBC, and CBS. This predates Fox. ESPN, when I graduated, ESPN had launched 2.5 years previously. I think if I have that right, 2.5, 3 years. They were in the embryonic stage completely. Cable was just starting to penetrate some American homes. It was still not available in large parts of New York City. You could not get cable in the early 80s. Long Island had it much more than the city did. So it was a much simpler, concentrated time around, we'll call the traditional broadcast networks.
Right.
So that's where I got my start, really at CBS Sports. And then the 80s was that explosion. Cable networks seemed to be launching every 6 months in the 1980s. And you were able to work at a place like USA Network by the mid to late 80s, which I think that launched around 1980 or 81 or something like this. These places didn't even exist.
Right.
So it was a whole different world. And I was able to, yes, work there and do a ton of traveling and produce all sorts of different events and Olympic games. And yeah, so you basically summarized it. And then one of the big leaps I made was leave you, because now you're getting into the early 90s, and this is when things are changing. And ESPN is becoming the dominant voice for sports television back then. And again, this predates what you were mentioning about individual networks for the different sports or streaming options or anything. It was just cable and broadcast. Such a simple world. There wasn't even the internet, really. This is just prior to the internet. So I took this gamble because USA Network was devaluing sports programming for all the right business reasons as far as they were concerned. And I took this sort of leap of faith to join Classic Sports Network. So I'd mentioned to you before, I had gone, at that time, USA Network had sort of very traditional corporate offices at, 30 Rock, would see the Christmas tree, and you felt like you were working in Midtown Manhattan, because you were. And I went from there to a small office on 21st between Broadway and Central Park South, and it was like doing television in your mom's garage, and we were all kind of figuring out how to build a network, and it was just an unbelievable experience. That was really,
to get to CSN, and you were, now correct me, you were working with USA at that point?
I was working with USA.
You chose to leave USA.
Correct. I had
for
a job.
this
Correct.
risk.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, it was completely a risk. The USA job was fine. I had been there at that time for about 7 years now. Was able to do a bunch of great events and again traveled everywhere. But I could see the handwriting on the wall, which was I could stay here, but I probably sort of peaked out, and if anything, the ability to do things here would diminish as the time went by.
Right.
So everything with my personal life and where I was, it just made sense that if I was going to take a gamble, which on the surface could seem like something, because television is such a crazy business, right? So if you have sort of a steady job, many people would say, why would you ever consider leaving? But just everything about my life at that time said, if you're ever going to take this leap, this was the time to do it. So it became a pretty easy decision ultimately.
Now, something I'm very interested in asking you about is the work that you've done over the course of your career is work that involves you, how should I say, corralling so many other people who are doing very different things for the same production goal.
Yes.
And that to me is something that takes a lot of creativity to do. So the podcast is us creative types,
yes.
And I know we had a conversation earlier and talking about creativity in different forms. And before we get into the CSN days and further, I did want to ask you a bit about your work with WBAU when you were at Adelphi, because to me, now I have a connection through degrees of separation to this. Mm-hmm. I've had another guest on here, your friend and your former classmate, Bill Stepney, who was also involved with WBAU, but also I'm a professor there at Adelphi as well. And the stories I hear about WBAU and its impact on the students and the community is just immense, and it never ends. I hear it again and again, even now. And so I wanted to make sure that we talk about that because it seems like such a significant association that you had.
It is. And I'll give you the sort of Reader's Digest background on why so many things aligned for it to be everything you said and more. No question. So basically, we're talking around the era of the late 70s and early 80s again. Much simpler time where people, especially young folks, really did listen to the radio. It's hard if anybody's watching this who's younger than 25. They couldn't imagine a time when people actually consciously turned on the radio as a form of entertainment. Mm-hmm. Right? But that's the way it was, and there was nothing unusual about it. So FM radio. So FM radio, back in the early days of, let's call it rock and roll and music, there was your top 40 stations on AM, the WABCs, the WMCAs, all the stations that all the kids would listen to. And then in the mid to late 60s, FM started playing music, and they were all these, what were called back then, free-form FM music stations, where the DJ was really the star of the show. So if somebody listened to your show, Scott, they knew your taste and what you wanted to do. And then I came for the 4 hours after your 4 hours, and I did things a little differently. And people listened to those shows based on our personalities.
So it's not just about the music. You're a curator.
You're a curator. You are a tastemaker,
personality,
a personality.
Right.
All those things were true. And these DJs back then were really enormous figures in sort of the cultural melting pot you would listen to. But as things happen, right, and we've seen this happen so many times in the 40 plus subsequent years from the time we're talking, 50 plus subsequent years, is as FM radio grew, it became more commercialized, driven by ratings. There was now money to be made.
Oh, sure.
So now you're trying to focus on getting listeners. So suddenly there were things like playlists where they wanted these 5 songs worked in because this is what is popular now. And the more we play this, the more we'll get people to listen to. So very slowly over that time in the 1970s, FM radio to some degree changed and became not exactly what top 40 radio was, but something in between. Okay, I needed to say that because now you get to the late 70s and early 80s in college radio. And suddenly college radio, and it wasn't just WBAU, but all the people who went to those other colleges and universities that had the radio stations feel the same way that we do at Adelphi with WBAU, because we were really there at a very interesting time where you had these like-minded people at a college radio station who now we were the people who had the freedom to create shows. And you also had sort of a dual mandate, so to speak, where because we were non-commercial, we were there to, it's amazing to think about how it was back then, but you were a sort of a public trust to do something good for the public and give it a diversity of everything. That it wasn't just to be one thing. So we were able to do shows that concentrated on freeform jazz or blues or polka or 1950s music. And when you got to the later part in the evening, new music, freeform music, whatever was hot at the time. Talking to Bill, what's so incredible about Bill's story, and I was there to see at least the first part of it, and then I graduated, but was still sort of around, is his show became sort of this hub of this burgeoning hip hop movement, which didn't even exist a few years before that. And he's at the epicenter on college radio, helping to create these incredible acts that we know now, like Public Enemy, et cetera. I mean, And
so how are you personally interacting with all of that at that time? What were you doing with regard to your work in WBA?
Well, I was heavily involved in our sports programming, but I also had music shows. And by the time I was a senior, I was the station manager, and Bill, I believe, was the business manager at the time. And he has his music shows. And it was a great situation because Adelphi had the license. They had a part-time professional person who was sort of the caretaker for the university to make sure that the inmates didn't run the asylum too much with the radio station. But the students were really able to run a business and manage things. And it's amazing because little did I know, and I know we'll eventually get to this, yes, I started off somebody who was involved with writing and producing things and live programming, but then became much more of a manager of, huge undertakings with many parts all going in different directions. And it's amazing how much that prepared me for that, because you're dealing on a smaller scale with many personalities, people wanting to do different things. Right. How are we all pulling our weight together? And I said many years into my career, what an unbelievable training ground being that station manager was of that college radio station and Adelphi. And everybody who was there, like I know you spoke to Bill, we all have this incredibly warm feeling of our time there. Incredibly.
That's amazing to have that, having essentially free reign artistically. Right to do that.
Free reign artistically, and this is why I needed to give you that sort of setup, free reign artistically in an era when you really filled a need and you became popular. Like college radio stations now are not nearly what they were back then.
Not at all.
Not because the people on college radio, and they're probably doing more podcasts and specific shows, because again, people don't listen to the radio. But in the 70s and 80s, radio was such a big deal that college radio became such a big deal in itself because it actually met a need that wasn't being filled by the commercial stations, whether they be AM or FM.
Right. There's a community that builds around those.
Absolutely. Yeah. There used to be people who listen to the radio would know, and I used to know this, but it's been so long. I think it's below about 91.9 and below on the FM was where all the non-commercial stations lived.
I see. Yeah.
So that's why WBAU was 90.3, WFUV Fordham was 90.7. So they were all together. So listeners eventually knew the interesting stations were actually down on that far left-hand side of the dial with the lower numbers, and it was a community of nonprofit, non-commercial college radio stations. Absolutely.
Right. Those formative, let's say the formative professional years, because you also have your formative years where you knew very early, I wanted to be in this, which is, I think, amazing to know so early in life what passion you have going forward, and then to make that into reality. Not everyone gets a chance to do that.
No, and I now that I'm obviously way on the end of that journey, I look back and I go, wow, that really did all happen. I really did watch television as a 5-year-old, amazed by it, and wound up having my career in it. Which yes, I know how lucky that is.
Wow. So after Adelphi, after those years where you had this opportunity to work in this really semi-professional environment,
good way to describe it.
How did you feel that was applied to your work in television broadcasting? Because, of course, there are going to be differences, but this incredibly creative opportunity that you had in what you were doing, and you obviously took that forward and put it to use in a different arena.
Right, and it's really the two things we're sort of concentrating on today. There's the creative part of it, where you're at the college radio station and you really are creating things. You're creating your own show. You may be putting together a pre-recorded taped story on something which you're creating from scratch, right? That translated directly to then my job when I went into television, and now I'm shooting a story on somebody, and you have to figure out how to do it and what's the angle. And I've always been somebody who loved telling a story, so I always looked at it as the creativity came from how can I tell this story in a way that I would enjoy hearing it. That was really the way I always went about it. So there was sort of that part of it. And then the other part of it, which we kind of touched on very briefly, was, well, now you're managing something and all the different people involved. And that directly helped me prepare for things I did later in my career. So it was really directly related to how I went about things, no question.
Right. And of course, we're talking in the realm of sports broadcasting. It's so interesting that there's the story to tell. The story itself is part of what captivates the audience. Part of it is I personally believe you find an athlete who is so well trained at what they do that it's so fluid. That in itself is an art too. And that's displaying some kind of an artistic understanding of how to do something with the body, But the way to tell that story can be the difference between whether someone finds that arena captivating too. That's part of the equation, is how you package that and how you present that.
Correct. Rune Arledge, who I hope people know watching this, was the genius behind sports television at ABC Sports back in the 60s, pretty much invented Wide World of Sports, and went on to be president not only of ABC Sports, but ABC News. Was involved in sports covering the horrible tragedy at the Munich Olympics. That's when he really made his mark. And he was the one who had the insight to know, if we're going to show the Olympics on primetime television, and there's going to be athletes not only from the United States, but from Italy and France and Norway and the Soviet Union, well, a person is going to care about watching this if they know a little bit more about those athletes and what makes them tick in the little town they grew up in, Bavaria or whatever, right? And he came up with these, it was just a simple little phrase, he called them up close and personals. And during ABC's Olympic coverage, they would pause and say, and now let's take a look at so-and-so up close and personal. And it would be a few minutes where they would have gone to the location, they would have shot how this person grew up, you would have learned the backstory of what made them tick. And now you're sitting at home watching the Olympics, and now you relate to that person. They're not just somebody coming down a hill skiing, they're actually a person that has had tragedy in their life or loved ones or grew up a certain way and now you know something about them. And that is so important in all aspects of television, but in sports television, as you're saying, it's crucial.
But I imagine that the timing of not only putting all of that together, because that exposes this really, to talk about the tip of the iceberg. I know it's the big cliche, but it really is true for so many different artistic endeavors, but this included, is that what the audience sees is such a small amount of the effort that was put into actually making that occur.
Yes.
So you have that, you're looking at part of someone's life, something biographical, but then also teasing out what of that is actually going to be useful for you in the moment, and then actually physically presenting it, that visual representation. Here's someone about to go down that ski slope, and when to put that in and how to make that effective. Those decisions must have been very important.
Yes, and there's two parts of that we can talk about. There's the one where you're doing something ahead of time, like we're talking about, where you're actually out shooting a story and figuring out the best way to do it, and the writing for television. Writing for television is really important because unlike the printed word where you could read a sentence or two and then go back because it didn't all click or you just wanted to make sure you were getting the intention of the writer the right way, television, that's not the case. A little different now because you could bring things back. This is the pre-DVR, pre-anything period. So you wanted to have your writing to be as sort of punchy and direct as possible while still being interesting and pleasant to the ear. So great writing for television is a real art that's kind of being lost a little bit now because of the way the world is. So that was an aspect to it. There was also the aspect, like you're saying, is visually, how are we going to shoot this to make it look as interesting as possible? And then what parts of it are we going to put together to tell the story that we feel is the best way to tell the story? And the hours that would take to go through the footage, write it, figure it out. What else do you need? What have we left out? And then the end result is, as you were saying, which is true, is somebody is sitting at home, hopefully nice and comfortable, and this 3-minute and 7-second feature flies by, and they enjoyed hopefully all of it, and never even thought about that 3 people got on a plane and went to Europe. They shot it. They came back. They had to figure out. They didn't like the way something was, and they got something else from some other location to figure. The permutations are endless, and the end result, hopefully, is that somebody's just watching it and doesn't understand. Or like in your line of work, Scott, as a musician, if a person is listening to this great performance of a song, they're not taking the time to think about all the hours of practice, what went on, who had to learn it, right? It's just the finished product. What you were starting to get at, I think, which is a whole nother can of worms, is live television.
Right, of course, yes.
Live television. So live television is a whole different animal. And after all these years now, here we are in 2026, live sports, because that's my area of expertise, is covered so well now that the viewer is sophisticated enough to demand a certain level of coverage, but doesn't take the time to think about what is going on to make it happen. Because there's a I don't want to say a theory, it's more just a reality, that the NFL is now a much better experience to watch at home on television than to go to the stadium, because you're probably very far away. Mm-hmm. All the TV timeouts affect you more in the stadium than they do at home, because at home you do have the ability to do whatever you want during that break or get something to eat or whatever, and you're comfortable. In the stadium, you're sort of held hostage by being in the stadium, and you're only seeing the game as you're sitting in the seat, wherever your seats are. Yes, you will get some replays up on a screen now, which are a big change.
And that's definitely something I wanted to ask you about. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Replays fascinate me.
Right, from the way it used to be. But going to live television, I'll explain. So when somebody's watching a game and somebody hits a home run or there's a touchdown scored in football, within a few seconds, they're seeing all these replays. They're hearing the play-by-play person explain what happened. They're hearing the analyst hopefully giving you some insight into why it happened, because most times they've played the game and have that expertise. And it all happens so seamlessly that nobody at home, and this is really the way it should be, nobody at home is thinking about what happened. Mm-hmm. But if anybody ever has the opportunity to go inside a television truck during a live game, you can equate it to a large band playing where the music sounds great, but if one person does something wrong, it'll stick out.
Right.
You could draw an analogy to people dancing and the choreography. As long as it's perfect, nobody thinks about it, but somebody makes a misstep. Oh, what happened? When in live television, and I'll be brief, but to just give you the machinations.
Oh, you don't have to be brief.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, this is a treat.
First of all, there are now so many cameras covering a game. So you're getting what would be the basic, what you would call the play-by-play camera that is covering the basic action of the game. Okay. But then everything beyond that, it's being supplemented from so many different angles, low, high, reverse from the angles. So what happens is the people know those camera patterns so well and know what the certain cameras capture the best from where something happened on the field or court, is a simple way to explain it, that when the touchdown happens, there's a whole operation in what used to be called tape, which is very funny because none of it is tape anymore, but it's still sort of called a tape. Right. It's all digital.
Let's go to the videotape. Remember that famous...
where it really was.
Right.
When Warner Wolf said that, it really was videotape. But now they have these machines, and this was a real breakthrough in television, which started, I would say, in the mid-90s, probably, where rather than recording everything on 1-inch tape, and when there was a great play made, the person had to actually stop the tape, bring it back, many times with their finger, hold it, and then slow-mo the tape. So now you would see that great play.
Okay, so that I have to. And that's crazy.
Yeah, and
that's crazy.
I'll even give you another part of that.
So we're talking about just for anyone who doesn't know this medium, we're talking about it's recorded on magnetic film,
1-inch videotape,
right? 1-inch videotape, and you have to physically go back. Mm-hmm. And know how far to go back.
Right, because they're watching it backwards. And what they would do is they would build these tape like holes so they can put their fingers on the top of the cover of the tape. Mm-hmm. And they could literally go like this. And they're watching the play backwards off a monitor, and they know just where to stop it. Now, here's the catch I didn't tell you. Well, as they're doing that, they're obviously not recording. So there always had to be another tape machine recording something. Because what happens if some crazy thing happened after the play? A player suddenly is hurt that nobody knew about, or something happened on the sidelines. So there was always this situation where, as the replays are being rolled, other tape machines that weren't doing that had to be recording. So there was always somebody recording something. When the EVS machines started, which is basically electronic video storage, they quickly took on the name the Elvis because it was close enough. The Elvis. That the breakthrough was it was channels digitally, and you can record and play back at the same time.
Yes, right.
So that revolutionized everything. You can build packages very quickly. If you ever watch baseball and you want to see a pitch sequence from a pitcher, they could build that as the at-bat is happening and not miss anything. First pitch, okay, boom, second pitch. And now they've got this 6-pitch edited together package of how the at-bat went that they could show immediately after the last one, which was the strikeout. Oh, okay, here's how that at-bat went. Boom. And you never were able to do that, but it would have been impossible.
Right. But that's so, I mean, talk about a dance.
A dance.
Wow. Talk about a choreographed dance.
Right.
And so, that sounds like there's a lot of pressure.
Right. So now, yes. And though that was a dance, I'll call it the bigger dance. So now the play happens. The producer and the director are the lead people in a live television situation. And people always, many times, are confused. Who does what? Because if you take film, the director is the boss when it comes to a film. When a film is being made, it's a director. The producer is more the money man many times, or figuring out the logistics, how to make it happen.
And by the way, I'm very happy that you're bringing this up, because this is a conversation I have with so many people, that the word producer changes
no matter
in what you're doing, depending on the medium. It's different in music, different in film, different in television. But please, because this is like a central important thing to understanding what is producing.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
You know, in music, a producer is there to facilitate. They're able to make suggestions to the artist. Right. You do it this way. I think this kind of a song would be good for you. Here's how I think you should do it.
And in some cases, they may be an engineer as well. A producer I worked with composed music for me, arranged music with me, did engineering and mastering. So sometimes they're jack of all trades.
Yep.
But so you're telling me that in film, we're talking about people who are essentially helping to bankroll.
Yes, in television, in film, a producer is much more the business person or the money person, the financing, that sort of thing. In music, as we were saying, it's much more a facilitator, collaborator, many times, right? An engineer, or works with kind of, in some ways, almost, let's say, bridges the gap between the engineer and the artist. It's
a great way to put it.
In music. Television, the director is in charge of what, in live television specifically, what you're seeing when you see it. They're the ones saying, take camera 2, ready, and take camera 3. So as the shots change, the director is the one doing that. The producer, though, is the one that's in charge of everything. And they could tell the director, stop, we're now going to get a replay. So when a touchdown happens, let's use a simple example with football. A touchdown happens, everybody at that point knows they're now going to show replays. So the director starts showing shots of the player who scored, the coach on the opposing team who's now trailing, the quarterback on the opposing team who's now going to get the kickoff and they're down by 3 points with 2 minutes. He's all doing that, waiting for the producer to work with the people in tape, which is in tape, and they're going to line up a series of shots that best show what happened. Maybe there's 2 or 3 of them to start. While that's going on, they're getting that ready. The producer is talking to the talent, the play-by-play and the analyst in their ear, letting them know we're going to see it, and in shorthand, we're going to see it to be able to show the block the right tackle made, or whatever the exact situation is. So within 10 seconds, all this is being done, and then it's the producer's responsibility to say the director, and the machines have either names that are colors or letters, X, Y, Z, red, blue, green, so everybody knows what they are. We're going red, green, and then X. So the director now takes it from there. He knows he's got to roll that, again, roll, you're not really rolling it, roll that machine. And then the producer even can help them know, you want to go to the next one. And it's all very quick. You go from one replay to the next replay to the next replay. And the announcers know most of what's coming, or at least some of it, and then can react on the fly. And they're seeing the play and they're explaining what happened. And then the director is getting ready. Where is he going when that last replay is ending and there's no reason to show that shot anymore? He or she has to now go to another shot. And then that's what they're responsible to do. This all happens within 15 seconds.
And you as executive producer, that's what you were doing. You were this overseer of everything that's happening.
Yes. At one time in my life, I did very little directing. I was much more producer, a lot of live events. And that's what you would do, is you would sort of be in charge. And then you would even have to know things like, how many commercials do I need to get in? When do I need to take those commercials? What are the promotional announcements I need to get in? What are the promotional announcements for other network programming that we want to make sure get in, because we know people are watching. We want to make sure they know about that great show on the network on Tuesday night. So you have to manage a lot of things on the fly as the producer. The executive producer is then, now this is where it gets to more the managing part of it, is in charge of all that's going on and is involved with more who's doing it. Who is the right person for these jobs? Why are they doing it? Who are the announcers? It gets into contracts. It gets into labor agreements. It gets into, what our overall philosophy is going to be. Because there's certain philosophies you can have for live television of how you want to do it. And the executive producer is the one who should at least be like a simple thing. Like sometimes what happens in television is, because cameras are so good these days, and the clarity is what it is, and the lenses, and it's unbelievable. A lot of times directors fall in love with close-ups because they could be so dramatic, right? Mm-hmm. You can really see into the player's eyes and you know just what they're thinking. It's awesome. But sometimes they over close up and it becomes a little bit watching like through a paper towel roll, and you don't get the perspective. So an executive producer could be the one of, guys, you want to at least show the perspective of what's going on. One rule, and this is not just particular to me, anybody who would have done what I did, you always want to instill, and people doing the producing and directing should know this, you always want to start general to particular, right? When a play happens, you always want to see, okay, what's the best angle of the play? So everybody now sees the play. This is all happening like this. Next, maybe you want to see an ISO, as it's called, which is an isolated camera just on the running back. So you see the way they go through the hole. And then the third replay is maybe an ISO of the left guard and the great block they made. You would never start by showing the block because you don't have perspective of what happened. So you need to always go from the general to the particular.
What is that lead time that you actually have between preparing that material and when you have to, I'm saying the term send it out, but that's probably not correct.
Seconds.
Seconds.
And the only way it can happen is it's one of those things, and it's like that way with any sort of creative endeavor or when there's a lot of people working together. Again, the analogy to dancing or music is very appropriate.
Right.
Where all the work and all the know-how has been done beforehand. And this is more the performance. So even though it's only seconds, the camera people are all shooting it the right way. The people in that tape area, which again isn't tape, know how to react to what they're seeing on the monitors. The announcers are already tuned in to that something's going to happen, even though they haven't been told yet. The producer is already knowing he needs to tell the director what's going to happen. So now it's just a matter of it all happening. So the play happens, the shots are picked for the replays, the director is informed, the announcers are informed, and it all happens. So it happens, well, for anybody watching this or yourself, Scott, next time you watch, and we'll just keep it to football to make it simple, or baseball as we're into the nicer weather now maybe, watch when a touchdown or a home run is scored, and then watch when the replay starts rolling in. It's seconds.
Yeah.
It's seconds, and it's all, and the different angles, right? And what you try to do is not only show the play, but tell the story of why this is happening. So again, to football, not only do you want to show the running back, you want to show the play, you want to show the running back, you want to show the great block that sprung the running back. You may want to come out, if you don't have it live anymore, but somebody was recording it, the frustration of the opposing coach on a replay shot. Oh, I can't believe we let that happen.
And I didn't even think of that, right?
That's all part of the storytelling of what's happening, right?
That's kind of right, storytelling.
Right? And with the technological advancements I explained, where you can now be playing stuff back while you're still recording, you're not missing anything. So if you see that, you talk about the lead time, that could be instantaneous, where let's say you have 3 different angles of a play. It could be a situation where the producer who's manning tape just goes, great reaction on X. And the producer many times will trust that this is happening in seconds, is now, rather than coming out live off that third replay, tells the director, go to one more, because you always have to be aware of missing anything live. So you have other people in the truck warning you that they're about to start or kick off or what's going to, right? Because you can't be missing a play to show a bunch of replays.
Right.
It's all in a certain amount of time. But you can get this extra 3-second shot of the frustration of the other coach that they got on tape. That's instantaneous. It happens.
You see that storytelling aspect, that's so much more than just we're going to be filming and presenting a game.
Right.
That's so much more.
And it builds tension, even if it's done subconsciously, to the viewer, because, and that's the difference I was mentioning about football, watching it on TV or being in the stadium. You have the big expanse of the stadium. You watch the play. You can see the fans react. Fans react off fans reacting. So that feeds off each other.
Right.
It's like the madness of crowds almost. Everybody reacts to everybody reacting. And now you see maybe you see a replay or two on the scoreboard, but that's it. While at home, if the people producing and directing the games are doing their job with this staff of people, they're really able to get inside the game and let you know what maybe the reaction or mentally what's going on, or something to anticipate, almost like a little foreshadow of what to think about. So it's very interesting how it's done. And I urge people, next time they watch a sporting event, don't watch it for 5 minutes even. Just watch it not as if you're watching to enjoy the game. Watching it and think about all the decisions going into what you're seeing for 2, 3, 3.5 hours, however long the event takes. It's a constant. When I used to produce live television, I used to laugh at myself. The amount of decisions you have to make instantaneously, One of the great skills. What skill do you need to be a good live producer? You have to be able to make a decision. You have to.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
There's not too much time to think of it at all.
Right. This is we're not contemplating here. Right. There's a great saying in television, lifetime, which is true, is a bad decision is 100 times better than no decision. Because if you don't let everybody know what's going to happen and you don't make a decision of what we're going to do at a certain time in a telecast, there's complete chaos. If you decide to do this and it turns out to be the wrong thing, at least everybody went in the same direction and you can react.
Right.
But if there's no direction and there's no decision, it's chaos. So you have to be willing to make decisions.
Well, I imagine, this is my experience of working in, let's say, an orchestra and having a conductor make a decision.
Right.
And of course it's
a producer's a conductor. That's many times what it's been told. That's what they are. That's exactly what they are.
Because there's also, I imagine there's an element of the confidence that you have as a producer, whether someone agrees or disagrees with a particular decision, the fact that there is that grounding force of someone saying, we're going to move on in this way, we're going to do that, helps other people do their job at the same time.
Yes, and it doesn't work unless everybody buys in. It's a nobody's going to get hurt and no life is in danger form of the military. There's a chain of command, right? And you can't have somebody say, oh no, we shouldn't do that. Even if you disagree. Right? You have every right to disagree and not think the producer made the right decision, but you got to follow it. Or again, there's chaos.
Right.
That's about the only thing you can't do. The other thing people should know is when they're watching a game, and let's say there's 8 or 10 cameras shooting the game, it isn't as if these camera people are just shooting whatever they want, right? There are specific assignments for each camera. One camera may know that they're shooting from a certain angle and they want to be tight on the action. Another one may be isolated to certain players that were determined before the game because the producer and the director knew the storyline and knew who we should be concentrating on and wanting to see.
Right.
Things like that. So they're not free. There's some times when there's freelancing. Again, this is where it becomes nothing is absolute and there's a little bit of a dance. A good camera person is following his assignments, but when, let's say, a dramatic moment happens, they have to be able to freelance a little bit to be aware and get great reaction shots. When the United States won the gold medal in hockey, are you aware to get the best of the players celebrating? There's no choreography to how they're going to celebrate. First of all, you don't know how the game is going to end, right? We don't know if the Americans are going to win. If they win, what's the goal going to look like? Who's going to score? Where is it going to happen on the ice? Which part of the ice are they going to go to celebrate? None of that is known until it happens, right? So the camera people have to be aware to capture that moment, and the director has to be plugged in enough to know that these are the sequence of events we want to see, while not forgetting to get the disappointment, because there's a little bit of an adage where celebrations many times last longer than disappointments. So don't be afraid to go get that dejected shot quickly, because you may lose that dejected moment that happens and never get it back again, where they're going to be jumping around, continue to jump around, that kind of thing.
Would you ever review, let's say, a finished product, maybe after the fact, because obviously you can't watch it while it's happening, and adjust or learn from what you felt worked or what you didn't work? How did you progress in your craft doing that? Because you did this for a number of years in so many different areas of the same thing. At some point, there has to be some kind of a review and learning process on your part.
Yes, and a lot of it, and it's funny because I did do it for such a long time. A lot of it involved the technology, because you were constantly able to do more. So now it's sort of like, okay, here's how you do things. Now you have this technology that allows you to do more. Well, what are you going to fill in that blank from where you are to where you can go? And how are you going to do it? Right? That was a big one. It was, how does this make our lives better? How is this able to get us to tell the story of the game better, to get better, to show the game better? The other part of it, of my job, which we really haven't touched on, which as an executive was crucial, was working with the on-air talent. That was a huge part of what I did.
Like those who are commentating, those who are actually speaking to that audience.
Correct. Because if we're doing basketball or hockey games, let's say, the people doing those games are very good at what they do. And yes, we would have meetings before the season and there would be philosophical discussions and how we wanted to cover it, but they're incredible professionals who knew how to do their job, right? So there was some guidance on my part, but there was also, they were doing their job. Announcers many times, especially the analysts, so here's an interesting way, something to think about when they watch at home. The play-by-play person is also somebody who has been honing their craft for many years, right? They probably started in college, right?
Right.
And calling their university's basketball games. And they've worked in many different areas. And by the time they're working at a certain level, like working in New York was, they were accomplished. And the only reason you hired them, you meaning me or anybody like me, the only reason you hired them is because they were really good, right? So they were more of a finished product. But your analyst was basically somebody who retired from playing the game, who may have never done television.
Oh, I see. So in that aspect, they may be I don't use the term pejoratively, but an amateur in that respect of being in front of the camera for that reason.
Yes. And that's where, and it's so interesting. What I used to tell them was the ones that succeeded and were serious about doing it, because for former athletes, there was a bunch of different ways they could approach it. It could be, I was a big star in such and such a sport. I need something to do now that I've retired. I can just get up in front of the camera and talk, and people will want to hear what I have to say because I did such and such in my career. Right?
Possible.
Right? right. And that ultimately usually doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. It's the ex-athletes who look at it as a craft, and I would always equate to them, this is exactly like being on a team. You're part of a team, just like, right? You are a part of the team, just like you were on the team you played for. You have certain things you need to accomplish, just like you did on your team. There are certain people you need to listen to, most directly the producer and the director in the moment. They're sort of your coaches. And there's people like me, who's like the general manager of, it's very analogous for their brains to sort of get a hold of, and that you need to take the criticism and you need to want to get better. And you need to be able to explain to them, do they understand why they're here to do this? Because a lot of times they just think, well, because I played the game, I can just say what happened on the field because I know the intricacies of the field. But what they really need to do is, because they were, no matter how much somebody watching may have played sports, the odds are they were never in an NHL huddle or on an NBA court or in an NHL locker room, you name it, while this person has. So they have to bring that personal experience that only they can bring. And you need to be able to tell the viewer not only what happened, like I would always say, I could say that was a good pass, right? I see that. I know sports well enough to know, well, that was a good pass. Your analysis shouldn't be, well, that was a beautiful pass. It should be, that was a great pass because he looked and anticipated the movement of the player. All the next level things that those people need to sort of, because otherwise they're not really doing their job the way they, and that was a big part of working with those people. And the ones who succeeded then became great at it. And then, which is a different skill set than the ones in the studio on, let's say, a pre or post game show, where now they're either setting up the game, and this is not in a live setting to the game, it's live television, but not for the game, or reacting to the game in a post-game setting in the studio. That's a whole nother different skill set. Do you have the ability to really do certain breakdowns that you wouldn't have time to do during a live telecast? That was a big part of what I did.
Forgive me if this is an analogy that doesn't hold up, but just from my own experience, I'm a performing saxophonist. I work in a lot of improvisational settings, playing a lot of jazz, and especially with instruments like saxophone that lend themselves to speed. Mm-hmm. Because I always tell people, let's face it, the saxophone as a technically difficult instrument is not as hard as some other instruments. It's very well constructed. Okay. So a lot of people can play fast. But there's this problem of what we call overplaying. A saxophonist will get on stage and really want to impress everybody, and then they kind of play too much, or they work too hard. And I imagine that being in a situation where you haven't been behind a microphone. You really want to get it. You want to do as well as you can. And it's a second career for some of these people who do it well. But there's a danger of, I guess, maybe trying too hard.
100%. Absolutely. There's a couple of different ways that you'll see ex-athletes go about it. And I'm specifically speaking about the ones who are taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They'll either take a while to realize there's a little bit of a performance. Anybody out there who's familiar with John Madden, the old football analyst who was sensational, and people years ago, John
He had this personality, right? You knew who he was. His fingerprint was on everything he did.
Correct.
Yeah.
John Davidson did it for hockey, other
Right.
people. The one thing they did, if you look at kind of the pyramid of what made them successful, at the very top was they gave the viewer the feeling that there's no place they would rather be than right here, right now, telling you about this awesome game and this great setting that I'm going to now tell you about what happened. And it's infectious. There's an energy to their delivery. The viewer at home feeds off that. And again, it's a little bit like almost like a singer, if you want to equate it to music again, where you don't want to oversing or undersing.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to how to kind of find your voice, literally and figuratively, of how to sort of hit your energy. That's another thing that all announcers work on, even the play-by-play people. It's like, what's my voice? What's the right energy level where I don't sound cartoonishly excited or like I'm not into this and I'm distanced and almost bored maybe. There's kind of a voice in the middle. So they either don't realize that yet and we all know, Scott, anybody in any situation when they're uncomfortable, what's the most likely reaction they have?
Right. They retreat. Right. Of course.
They turn inward, right?
So they might watch everyone else talking. They're just kind of standing there. Yeah.
Because they don't have confidence in some unusual setting. It's the most natural thing people go through, right? Yeah. So for somebody who hasn't been on television, even though they have these incredible credentials because of what they accomplished in their playing career, they're a little timid to actually let it all out because it's an uncomfortable, different situation, and they wind up not bringing any energy to it.
How do you interact with, how did you deal with those situations as a producer?
Yeah, a lot of times you would actually watch what they did and talk to them about it.
Mm-hmm.
You would just say, always think that everybody watching at home really wants to hear what you have to say. I mean, that's a great
point,
right?
Absolutely.
It's a great advantage that they have. It's not like somebody who, oh, now I got to hear from so-and-so.
No, they have the credentials going in.
They have the credentials. They want to hear. Anybody watching television on sports is doing it for, it's entertainment. They're doing this because they like it, right? Nobody's forcing you to watch a sporting event. You're doing it because you want to do it and you're enjoying it, so you're open to what's coming towards you. It's not like you're doing this. It's like eating the vegetables that don't taste good and I have to do it. This is the candy, right? I want to eat this. So and then that's really what you tell them, is just understand that to bring energy, be infectious about your enthusiasm for what's going on, and then the people at home will pick up on that enthusiasm. The point you made, though, is the other part of it is, yes, they feel they need to play too fast. Your exact analogy, where they don't understand yet how the medium works. They speak too much because now they think, well, if I'm here to talk, I have to talk.
Right. I'm not doing my job unless I'm doing this all the time.
Correct. And
subtlety is an art, right?
Subtlety is an art. Balance is important. You know, it's like a lot of things in life. If you get the balance right, it's all going to work out after that.
Right,
and that's so true when it comes to people on television.
In your world, would you find that depending on the producer, you could, especially let's say there's a producer whose work you know very well, is there that artistic fingerprint on that? You see like, oh, this is something that looks like it was produced by so-and-so, or it's not a surprise to me that this name did that because I see the process that they like to use.
Yes, and usually the answer is yes, and usually because the smaller an event, and what I mean by smaller, I mean it's not a big stage for the event. Maybe it's a regular season game where there's however many cameras are being used, and it's not a big production, let's say. If something's not a big production, it's harder for somebody to really put their mark on it because they're just probably, there's a certain level they're trying to achieve with how they cover the game. When it's a massive platform, something like a Super Bowl or Sunday Night Football, which is the highest rated thing imaginable on which has been on NBC forever. Those groups of people really put their fingerprints on it because they were amazing at what they did. They had the resources at their fingertips, and it was the perfect meeting of super talented people and the resources to create this amazing production for people at home. So yes, though there are people who can put their fingerprints. Directors can do it too in live television, even though the adage I started to say before about in movies, people think movies are a director's medium because again, the producer is more the business person. The analogy for television is it's a producer's medium because the producer is really the one in charge, right? But when it comes to live sports, a director can really put their fingerprints on it because they're the ones instantaneously are making those decisions on what to shoot. And there are directors who overcut, right? Because that's another part of it, right? How often do you change the shot? If you change it too much, it's going to, here's another thing for people.
It can be dizzying if you do a lot of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's another thing for people to keep in mind when they watch. When you watch a sporting event, see if you even notice the change of shots.
That's a great point.
Because if a director's doing it well, it's almost seamless. It's almost like, of course I'm leaving the shot and going to another shot.
Yeah.
Because now I'm able to show you a certain reaction. But if it seems, like you said, dizzying or jarring, or it seems like, why are we still looking at this?
Right.
You know?
And yet if it doesn't move around enough, the only way I can describe it is it makes you feel claustrophobic when you watch.
Yes.
If you feel like you can't get enough angles, because as you said, if you're watching football, there's this advantage from seeing a program rather than being there. But if you're not seeing enough of a variety of viewpoints, then it might seem like I feel like I'm just seeing this in this box and I'm not getting the picture.
Exactly. And that is another way. That was great. That's another way to say what I said earlier about directors getting too focused on one close-up after another, because that gets almost, I think I use the analogy of looking at through a paper towel.
Paper towel,
right? So that can give you that claustrophobic feeling is you need to get the scene. What's a scene? A last second shot in basketball is made or an overtime goal in hockey. Don't go right to the player celebrating. Give me this great perspective of all the players jumping on the court or the ice,
right,
the dejected other team, the fans going nuts, and then you can get tight to show
You're reminding people of the gravity of what just happened.
Right, exactly. And then you can get tighter to see everybody celebrate. If you start by going just tight, you've lost the importance, the magnitude, as you said, of the event. That is something that unfortunately people still do sometimes, and that's something I think they should stay away from. Yes,
right,
100%.
Wonderful. If you could tease out a couple of moments that you feel very proud of in your career.
Well,
I'm sure there's a lot to be proud of.
No, and the reason I took a deep breath is because there are moments and there are situations. The mentoring part of what I did was very important because there were a lot of younger folks breaking into the business on a production standpoint, and they would want to talk to you and how you mentored them and sort of the passing it forward, sort of what you can tell people what you've learned to make them better. That always was a big part of it to me. But things that I was sort of proud of from a more professional situation is, I do look back when I left USA Network for Classic Sports Network. That was something I was proud to do at the moment, and even prouder to do in retrospect, because when you're in the middle of something and we were all working as hard as we could at that network. Many years later, we said we felt we were the eye of the storm a little bit because we were all working so hard, and we don't realize the stakes. We don't realize the investors. Our CEO Brian Beadall and President Steve Greenberg had these incredible backgrounds, and they were dealing with all this stuff while we were trying to make it all happen. And we were just sort of doing our jobs and collaboratively having fun and doing great work. And the fact that the network succeeded, and it succeeded because it was a different era, nothing like that could succeed today. But the fact that we all worked together and it succeeded was incredibly rewarding. Incredibly, because there was no guarantees at all.
And you were at the ground level of this.
The ground level at this with other people, absolutely.
That's a beautiful risk reward situation.
Right, because when you're in television, there aren't many opportunities to really feel part of something new. Because most of the time you're working for people or with entities that have existed many times for a long time.
That's a great point.
Right?
Right.
This was something where certain people, not me, had this idea, brilliant idea, and we were able to execute it to a successful conclusion. And that is something, I'll always be, because it took a I'll call it a calculated risk, because I told you, because in the situation I was in my life, I wasn't being reckless or silly. A lot of people look at risks as a bad thing. It's really, what is the risk and why would you take it, and what is the downside, right? That's how you have to look at a risk, I think. And this was a calculated risk that made a ton of sense. And I say this to you, even if it didn't succeed, I never would have second guessed myself for having done it. And and this was a situation where it didn't all go, linearly perfect. There were peaks and valleys, and there were compromises I had to do, because the hours we were working were very intense compared to what you would have done in a regular job. And it all worked out. And I was always really proud of that. And it just at Madison Square Garden, I mean, the fact that working at such now it's the opposite, right? Now it's working at a humongous entity, but you're in a important position with so many different things to juggle, that is something I'm always very proud of, because it's a kind of job, and I'm sure people have these kind of jobs in different endeavors, where you have certain things you absolutely want to do on a certain day, whether it's a mental list or actually an old-fashioned written out list. And then you get into work and something completely unforeseen happens. This was that job. I had a job where anything could have happened involving anybody at any time, from a political perspective in the company, from a operational perspective in the company, you name it. We had every single, suddenly there's a pandemic coming down the line. I mean,
I forget who said it. It was originally a military quote. No good plan survives contact with the enemy.
There you go.
Right.
Right. So, and the fact that I was able to navigate those situations and just always sort of figure it out, that's another thing I always look back on as being pretty proud of.
Wonderful. What advice would you give for people who they're passionate about it? It could be sports, but maybe they're passionate about broadcasting, passionate about communications. These are all areas that overlap greatly in what you've done.
Absolutely.
And what advice you would give for those today who are, let's say, they're close to college age, or maybe in college, and that age where they've had those formative years to decide, this is what I really want to do with my life, and how to move forward. Yeah.
And what I it's a great question, because it's a different answer than I would have given 15 or 20 years ago. What I mean by that is, the media landscape is undergoing such a transformation. I mean, everything. I still feel like we're at the top of the mountain. So the simple way to explain this is, before streaming, when the world this has nothing to do with the internet or anything like that, when it was still basically broadcast television and cable networks on cable television. Okay? And that's the way most people consume content. They weren't going to their computer to stream anything or anything, right? The peak of that environment was 2011. That was the exact moment when people were still not streaming, and the 30 years previous to 2011, or 35 years to that point, cable had penetrated as many homes as they ever were going to. That was it. ESPN was in over 100 million homes in 2011.
Wow. Okay.
I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but I think it's in the 60s now. Talking like 40% of the amount of homes that have ESPN.
Right. Huge difference.
Huge difference. So then it felt very much like a stable business. I've worked for networks, but regional sports television, that was a very great, healthy business, because it was based on cable providers, and they would then provide your network and what they offer, and everybody paid the same bill, whether they watched your network or not. Think about that. That already seems antiquated.
Right.
But that's why it was such an incredible system, because, just to use us at MSG as an example, whether somebody was a huge Knicks, Rangers, Devils, Islanders fan and watched all the games or never turned us on, and they lived next to each other on the block, they both paid the same bill. So you were able to mentor people in that environment with a much better understanding of how things look. That's why I'm giving you this background.
No, it's important to understand because that business model is really the foundation for a lot of it.
Right. Now that business model is completely died. It's on its last fumes because everything from people are cutting cable to, how about this, Scott, what you're doing now?
I was thinking we're a podcast. Right?
You're a podcast, and the quality of it, the technology behind it, all of this is still relatively new. My kids who are into their early 20s now can't believe there was a time in the late 90s when we would get around the TV at 8:30 on Thursday to watch Seinfeld. They think that's the Paleolithic age.
Right. We would plan our leisure part of our week based on when those things would be on. That was my childhood too.
Right.
I think I was really the last generation.
Right. Exactly.
That had that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my kids have grown up in an environment where they watch what they want, when they want, how they want. 3 things that never existed for me or even you growing up in, let's say, the 90s. So it's hard to know what this whole monster of media is going to look like in 5 or 10 years because we're still figuring it out. Here's one thing I tell people, and there's no ambiguity about this. You need to have multiple skill sets. You need to be able to be technologically savvy. You need to have the creativity and the storytelling ability if you want to be a producer. You can't just be, in my day, that was the way it was. It wasn't that I didn't want to do it. It wasn't even part of my reality. You were either a tech or a creative, a storyteller, a producer, or a technician, an engineer. Now you have to have a knowledge of everything. So that's the most important thing because we don't know what this is all going to look like. It's changed so much. I mean, we're in an environment now where, again, young folks, they don't even think about the broadcast networks. When I was a kid, those 3 broadcast networks and then Fox came along, they seemed like a step above everybody, right? And the whole playing field of what is media has completely changed because everybody is their own network.
Right. Everyone can be a reporter. Everyone can be a journalist.
I'm looking at one. You exactly.
You.
I mean, no, you seriously. I mean, this is how, and that never could have happened even 20 years ago. Right. So what I would tell a student is you definitely follow your passion because if you can be along for the ride, it's not like, I don't think me nor anybody else is going to be able to tell you, well, this is exactly how it's going to look like in 2036. No one can do that.
Right.
But what I can say is you need to be versatile, curious, you need to be collaborative, you need to grow with what's happening because if you're all those things and you grow with what's happening, however this all turns out, you'll be part of it, right? Just go for it. That's what you really need to do because this is something, and I was this way too, maybe you were, Scott, is you want sort of the answer before you start when you're young, right?
We always hope we can get that, but of course, that's not a luxury we often get.
Right, because everybody say, well, I would love to be doing this when I'm 30 or 35, and that's so hard to predict, and life goes in different directions, and career growth, just like personal growth, isn't linear, and there are detours along the way, but if you have the passion, and you're willing to put in the hard work, you should follow that passion. You should, because why not, right? Because you can always change your mind somewhere along the way, but if you don't do it as a young person, then when are you going to do it? And if you want to do it, if they were coming to somebody like me or others for any kind of advice, well, they're already stepping up to the plate, right? Because they wouldn't be coming to talk about it if they weren't. So now it's just a matter of, have a good at-bat when you're up there. Go for it because you can do it. You just have to sort of go. And don't worry about what your first job is. Get the first job.
Right.
Because personal networks grow very rapidly. Opportunities come out of the blue. You can't predict them. And that's a tough thing for a young person to understand because they have a hard time not realizing that it's messy and they think it's illogical, or A will lead to B will lead to C. And many times it doesn't work that way. And it's fine and it still comes out okay.
I mean, that's wonderful advice. I think it's very healthy advice. It's pragmatic, but it's also I think in a healthy way, cautiously optimistic, because we must be, right?
Right.
The world is too daunting of a place for us to go in with another attitude. If
Absolutely.
you have passion, of course there's a chance that something might not work out, but you don't know if you don't try.
Correct.
And if you're not really going all in, well, then it's probably not going to work out anyway because you didn't put that effort in.
Right. Right. And the people who have the passion and are willing to put in the work, regardless of how the situation develops, usually come out okay. Usually.
That's right. No doubt in my mind about the amount of creativity that's involved in being able to do what you do to a professional and high-level degree that provides a product which is not just it's information, it's entertainment, and it can be many things to many people, but it's something that's very important to a great many people.
Yes.
But to do that, you have to have that creative mind to do it, and you had been applying that for decades doing.
Yes, and what I found when it comes to me specifically, I think whatever creativity I have comes from the passion for what I'm doing, because that's where the spark usually comes. Because as we all know, my definition of a creative idea is something that sort of just it's there, and 5 seconds ago it wasn't. Right? How about you're thinking about it, and that many times comes from mindset and passion. The other thing about television specifically, and you may know better than me about this when it comes to, let's say, somebody who's an artist or a musician, where you're really working at the creativity of your craft, and how you ultimately get there may or may not matter based on the situation. When it comes to television, I have encountered so many wonderfully creative people, but because it's in the setting of television, which has its own sort of confines and walls, you have to be able to almost be your own editor and manager of your creativity to succeed. That's, I think, a message I would want to get across when it comes to television, because there are creative types who could say, which every creative spark or idea they come up with, they think is the greatest. This is the greatest, right? And they don't edit themselves. If they thought of it, they thought of it.
That's
right?
a great point.
Right? And you can't do that in television. You have to be an editor. The other part of it is, at the same time, and sometimes, brains can work in two different ways. There's the creative brain and there's more the organizational structural brain, right? However it's properly described, where in television, you can be as creative as you want, but you can't not have the structure because you're working in an environment that lends itself to that. Does that make any sense?
No, absolutely.
Right? Because I've seen, again, many people who weren't, because in television, you not only have to be creative, you have to be organized. Again, if you're a producer and maybe you're thinking of some interesting creative ways to cover a game, well, that's your creative brain. But then your organizational brain is, there needs to be a format for the telecast. It needs to be followed. Certain people have to do certain things at different times, which you're in many ways dictating how that's going to happen. Right. And if you don't have the idea to think structurally and creatively at the same time, that's a difficult thing to not have and succeed in television.
With my own experience in the arts, I absolutely agree. The quantifiable aspect of whatever we do, I think, not only channels, but I think it helps to strengthen and focus any kind of creative outlet. Right. You need boundaries in some way. Right. To have absolutely no boundaries, then that scenario that you said might happen, where it's this almost kind of borderline narcissistic view of someone's own creative mind, that anything I do must be great. But then how can I take a vision and apply it in a way that's now understandable to someone else? Because the way you understand your ideas is very different than someone else.
Exactly. That's a great point.
And all the work that's involved in making that happen. I mean, so much of what you do, and really any artist, musician, visual artist, I mean, I use the analogy of learning to paint is not just about what do I want to put on the canvas, but how does this medium react to canvas? Mm-hmm. How easy is it to spread oil versus acrylic? Or how do I use these brushes? And that's the quantifiable. And I think people can dismiss the idea of analyzing and quantifying aspects of what they think are traditional arts. And I think they also discount what is the creative side of something in your realm of broadcasting television, because they all have both aspects. And if you don't have them in a balance, then I don't think you really have a good product.
Yes. And when it comes to television, because I was loving your answer and thinking about it, that I think if there was sort of like a three-legged chair to succeed in television, I think it's a certain amount of creativity, a certain understanding of organization and structure, and a certain appreciation and understanding of judgment. Because those are really the three things it takes. You need to be able to have the structure and the organization needed. You need to be creative, but you then need to be sort of almost like when a music producer, no, that song isn't for you guys. You should do another song. This is how you should play that song, right? A certain part of taste or judgment or understanding. Those are really the three things I would think are the most important.
Jeff, this conversation has been so enlightening and just enormously satisfying that we have a chance to talk. I really appreciate that you took the time to come here, and I'm very happy that we can celebrate what you've done for such a long time that has really been very important to so many people.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure being here, and it's interesting because you don't usually have these kinds of discussions when it comes to people who do what I do, where you're sort of really, it's looking under the hood, but just almost what we talked about at the end here is not something I've really sort of put in a coherent way before. But the more we talk about it and the more you think about it, or we have thought about it with creativity and how you do things, this was a very helpful, interesting discussion. So I thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Jeff Filippi. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of Us Creative Types. Us Creative Types, the podcast, is hosted by Scott Littroff and is produced, directed, and edited by Carol and Scott Littroff. Music by Scott Littroff. Artwork by Carol Littroff. And a very special thanks to our guest. Us Creative Types is available on YouTube and on all major podcast platforms. Follow, subscribe, like, and connect with us on social media. New episodes are published weekly. Until next time, stay curious and stay creative. Us Creative.